Thank you.
The clock is not running.
The clock is not running.
You'll get your
okay.
You'll get your 2 minutes.
All right. I like winning work from Mark as well. Just saying. So I think I've always wanted to be an author because I like to use big words like prologue. Whether or not that makes sense in this context, I'm not sure. This is me from a few years ago, and the reason why I chose this photo, there's actually two reasons. One is because I look like I'm playing a part. I'm kind of dressed not for my age. And the second is my father's shoes. I don't think I realized it at that time, but I was meant to sort of fit in those shoes. As Mark said, I come from a family of doctors, so everybody in my family was a doctor. My mother was the only rebel who wanted to be a fashion designer, so that's what she did. But there was always this sort of expectation that I would be a doctor as well. This is my rendition of the Diesh hierarchy of occupations, if you will. At the very bottom rung is an artist. You'd starve if you're going to be an artist, but you could do that. My family wasn't very dictatorial. I had the freedom to be able to do what I wanted to do, but I was just sort of taught these things. You could be a business guy, but that's vulgar. You do make money, but at least you'll have a livelihood. But if you wanted to achieve sort of true enlightenment, you would be a doctor. Knowing this, there was a bit of a problem in that I was engineered a little bit differently. I wasn't quite off that same DNA. So I sort of enjoyed arts more than I did science. I enjoyed language more than I did math. But I grew up with that sort of that appreciation of being analytical and looking at process as something that was something that would sort of guide my career as well. Talking about my career, I enjoy creativity, but I'm really energized by the idea of working within a system and a construct. And that's something that has sort of really sort of guided me through my career. So if I think about what I'm excited by, I had to use these photos. They were just too fantastic. I'm not all about just a creative output, but I really enjoy the process of also making things. So the process is just as important to me as is the actual final release, if you will. I use the word release. So today I'm going to be talking about that duality of business and design, of how they both can probably help each other to elevate each other's work and be able to lead to more fulfilling results. So if you talk to a typical client, this is what a typical project lifecycle looks like in their mind. They do a lot of work before they involve a designer. They do some work after that. But the designer is hired, and they come in, do what they do. They don't need to know what happened before or after. If you ask somebody in this room what a project lifecycle looks like, it would probably look something like that. I'm not trying to say that project life cycles are bad. It's just that we probably have a more real idea of what projects look like. Because of what we do and because of our backgrounds and our experience, we know that projects are more complicated than that, and they will have ups and downs. What I'm proposing today, that as creative people, we actually can give to projects at a lot of different levels. So those little dots actually indicate where I believe that creative people can be of value. So if you think about all the different things that it takes to bring a project to completion, a designer is best suited to create a pitch. Who better to bring in business? Who better to actually interview stakeholders to be able to get the information that you need to be able to actually formulate what the project is all about? And who better to think about brainstorming, because we can help people visualize things that don't actually exist. So I'm not going to go through all the roles, but you get the idea that we can do so much, and we probably know that we can do so much. But there's a bit of a problem. Business people don't really understand design. They don't really get what we do. They don't really get creativity. It sounds like something that is nice and pretty to have, but it's not really essential. So why is that? Why is there this problem where we are always trying to sell what we do? We are fighting with people to be able to really exercise our creative muscle. This next slide I adapted from a lady called Moara Cullen. She is the director of design for Coca-Cola. She worked at Hallmark, and now she is a global director of design at Hershey's, so she kind of knows what she's talking about. She proposes that designers are actually deliberately excluded from strategy meetings where the big decisions happen, and that is because of the way corporate structures work. At the very top level, you are paid money to be a concept guy. You're paid money to be somebody who can look into the future to figure out where the company needs to go. And at the very, very bottom level is technical people, people who use computers and software to be able to do their work. So if you think about who you are and how you're seen in the world, designers by their very nature, creative people by their very nature, tend to elevate and talk about the final product. If you think about design awards are usually given around typography and color and the beauty of what is created, but very often the emphasis is actually not on the process that it took, the strategy that it took, the concept that it took to actually create the work. Businesses, on the other hand, value concept. They value the big idea, they pay money, and they give power to those who can think in the abstract and create from the abstract. So it's time for us to really get honest about what we bring to the table. So if we talk to people at a party, what are we going to tell them what we do, and how do we talk about it? What do we tell them that we are great at? If I went around the room, I think that we would probably figure out that we talk a lot about the physical. We talk a lot about the work that we have done in the way of portfolios and brochures and websites, but very rarely are we able to think about how we're going to talk about our processes, how we talk about the big ideas that we have that are going to make this world a better place. And at what point in the conversation do we bring up the heart, the gut, that we know innately just as creative people that this is going to work? So how do we make that part of the conversation? How do we have that richer, deeper conversation about what we do? So today I'm proposing that we change the word creative. We stop using it as a noun. I think that limits us and doesn't really help us be able to tell the entire picture. So if you think about who we are as a whole, I want to be able to say that I need to understand the problem before I can deliver a solution. I want to be able to say that I need to understand my target audience before I can actually make something that looks good. And that's something that we should really think about, because that is really what is going to separate us and make us more valuable in the economy that we live in. This isn't my output, and this is not what I want to be known for. Yes, I can choose beautiful colors and I can make pretty things, but that isn't really what my contribution is. And I don't work here. I need to be involved in all aspects of business. I can't do my work in isolation. Don't check me in a dark room and give me Photoshop and think I'm going to do it. It's not going to happen. So I've used a word like prologue. I may as well use a word like battle cry. What is our battle cry? What are we going to actually want to get out of this? I say that we should infect all business with creativity. If you think about Thomas Edison, he didn't just create the light bulb. His brilliance was in actually thinking about the problem entirely. The light bulb was created 50 years before he did it. But he was really able to think about how to bring light to the masses in a practical, economical, safe way. And to do that, he hired people that were brilliant, people that were actually smarter than him, because he needed to figure out how to generate electricity and how to supply it to consumers. So he was able to, his true genius wasn't in product design, it was in that he was able to think about the whole problem, blend art, business, science, and business savvy to actually make a product that was priced so that it would actually be something that we could all use all over the place. So this is not design, this is not design, and this is not design. Design is actually all of this. Creativity is required for the entire picture. I'm saying all this, and I'm going really fast because I'm thinking about my 20 minutes, but I'm hoping that you're taking the time to think about your own careers and how you're reframing and framing yourself every day. Are you actually pitching the entire solution? Are you giving yourself the freedom and the time to be able to think about problems entirely? Or are you being asked to design the light bulb? So sort of think about that for your own careers as well. Simon Sinek talks about the golden circle, and he says that most companies are really great at telling you about their what. The what meaning about their product, bigger, brighter, shinier. But it's only the brilliant, most fantastic, once-in-a-lifetime companies like Apple that are able to answer the questions why and how. Why is what I do matter, and how is it going to impact the people whose lives it's going to touch? So if I went around the room and asked you what you do, you'd have a knee-jerk reaction. You'd tell me exactly what you do. But if I quizzed you on the whys and hows of what you do, it's going to be a difficult conversation to have, because it's not part of your elevator pitch, I would propose. So it's something that you want to think about when you're thinking about your career and you're thinking about your context. This is something that I struggle with all the time, is why do I do what I do? How am I actually improving the planet or improving people's lives? And then at the end of that, what I do becomes really sort of an automatic reaction, an automatic answer to have. So what are the new rules? If you're going to change the game, we need to change the rules. We are told to focus on the solution. I suggest instead that we start to live in the problem more. The only way that I have found success in my career to be able to do that is to get hired as early as possible in projects. Obviously, that is an ideal situation and doesn't always happen, because when you're hired early, you can ask questions that begin with why. You can ask really simple, moronic, dumb, stupid questions, and it's okay, because people are still trying to figure things out for themselves. And sometimes you're paid really big money to ask really stupid questions, because nobody has had the balls to ask those. So it's something that you want to think about, that if you can, whichever organization you work in, I'm lucky because I sort of float in and out of projects. But when you're working in a company, it's harder. But as much as you can, if you can, get involved as early as you can. The 4 photos that I have up there represent brilliance, not in technology, not in the money that was spent in coming up with that idea. It was a poor mechanic in Brazil who wanted to bring light into his slum. The slums are overcrowded, there's no windows, there's no light, even though it's in Brazil and there's shining light outside. So what he did was he took a 1-liter plastic pop bottle, filled it with bleach and water, drilled a hole in his roof, shoved the bottle through the hole, and whoa, you have solar light coming in comparable to 60 watts as a light bulb. So no electricity, really looking at the problem from a problem space before he came up with the answer. So he managed to change people's lives by just a plastic bottle, water, and bleach. This idea has since gone viral, and they're planning to put 1 million of these solar light bulb bottles in the Philippines, in all the slums. So solutions don't lie in first world countries throwing money over to third world countries. Solutions actually lie in third world countries figuring out what is appropriate for them. It's called appropriate technologies. You may want to do a little keyword search on that. There's a lot of controversy around appropriate technology, whether it works or not, but the idea is to be able to do with less and to do within an environment what is right for that environment, and not actually import technology or solutions. So another rule is to be productive. I say, I thought my mom was going to come for this presentation, so my next slide has been tempered down. I actually had fuck productivity up, but I took fuck and I made it smaller because she's in her 70s. I thought she wouldn't be able to see the little word. Just a little aside. But I really honestly think that we need to change that mindset of productivity. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be accountable for our actions and we shouldn't meet deadlines, but what I'm saying is our focus should be on the quality of the work that we want to do, and we should be able to take the time that it takes to unpack a project and really solve it and look for an optimal solution. So again, this is sort of like Marie Antoinette telling you to have cakes when maybe you only have bread. But the idea is these are aspirational goals. When possible, look for projects that give you that freedom. Look for projects that understand that iteration is part of the process of creating something great. An example of this was a project that I worked on for a long period of time. I believed in the idea enough that I actually invested in it and became really involved at a startup level. And the challenge was to help people cook better. And I think the first meeting was, as most meetings go, can we have some mock-ups? And then I, as usual, had to slow the conversation down to ask, again, the really simple, stupid questions that begin with why. We spent a ton of time figuring out who our user was, and what we learned was sort of interesting. Our user was not the gourmet cook who needed to make more, better, bigger, fancier gourmet meals, and our target user was not somebody who never cooked, somebody who was happy eating at Subway or McDonald's. Our target, our core user, was the everyday cook, and that means that somebody who has to be in the kitchen to cook for their family, whether they like it or not. They have 3 or 4 recipes that they usually use, and they're frustrated by that experience because of the time that it takes and because of just how sheer boring it is. So the only reason we found that out was because we actually talked to people. I actually went through real cooking school to be able to figure out what people were looking for when they came to those classes. Most people look at recipes like this. So they see them as complicated little messy things that they have to do, and somehow they will get some mediocre result if they somehow win the lottery. But our gig, our job was to take the recipe and have it look like that. Have it become a series of discrete steps. Have people understand that it just takes simple techniques, and once you learn the simple techniques, you can make just about everything, and then get guaranteed results. So to have done this gave me the knowledge that I needed then to be able to build a project on a really strong foundation. So we were able to work with the technical team to break the recipe down into a component part so that it would be sort of like an e-learning exercise. People would be able to follow along at their own pace. We worked with marketing to be able to, am I one slide? Oh, there. I worked with the marketing and biz app people to make sure that the goals were aligned with the user goals. So what we wanted to launch as features for people was reflected in our business plan as well. I worked with the director of photography to make sure that the focus was always on the food, not on making dishes look not realistic, but having people be able to focus on what they needed to, which was to learn to be a cook. So we came up with a player, which in the end, what its biggest benefit was that it broke the video down into those component parts that I'm talking about. It made the recipe be easy to follow step by step. And should people want to, they were able to drill down further to be able to learn technique and become better cooks, not reliant on recipes anymore. So the only reason, and the reason why I'm talking about this project, is because of the time and because of the commitment that it took from the entire team to do it right. And it was a hard sell. When you're working in a startup model and you're not making any money and you're just burning money, how do you do that? How do you actually prove that? And one of the only ways that I have learned in my career is to actually have really awesome, honest user information. And when I say information, it's user knowledge. It's not just statistics. There's no 2.4 people in this planet. That doesn't exist. So you really have to understand who your user is and be able to speak on their behalf. Another rule is bottom line equals money. I suggest for creative people, actually bottom line equals money plus good work. But what does good mean? Good means different things for different people. I think that's something that you have to figure out. But essentially, what nourishes you? What is the work that makes you the better designer for the next project? For the longest time, I used to think, for me, it was nonprofit work. But then I realized that I didn't really care if a company made money or not. In fact, I prefer working for companies that make money because then I don't have to worry about invoices. For me, at this point in my career, what I'm more interested in, how does a brief translate to value and usefulness for the end user? I'm really energized by that. I don't really care about sexy brands. That doesn't do anything for me. But show me how something transforms somebody's life or helps them do something better, and you've probably got me hooked. So that's my little thing, but you have to figure out for you what is going to work for you and what would make you want to do this for the rest of your life. This is not Mark Bussey's belly button. So as companies become successful, there's a tendency to want to sort of mimic one's own success, to want to do the same things because hopefully it lead to the same results. But that doesn't really happen, and complacency is not really rewarded in the market. If you think about what happened to BlackBerry, I would suggest that is probably what happened. There was a lot of looking down at their belly buttons. Our role as creative people is to look for unexpected answers in unexpected areas. So we are probably the more responsible people who need to be always looking at, really? 2 minutes? Get out. Okay, I can't do this. I'm walking off. As a consultant, I find that it's much easier for me to do because I think my time is valued a little bit higher. And the reason for that is not because they pay me oodles of cash, but when you're paid by the hour, there's this sense that, oh my God, he's coming for this meeting. This meeting better be useful. We better listen to him. So that sort of sense, I wish there was a way I could find a secret formula to have employees be treated with the same respect. Because very often, I'm actually saying the exact thing that some little employee was saying in the room all along, but nobody was listening to them. So ego and status quo is really destructive and should be avoided at all costs. Okay, keep it simple. I was going to go on and on about this, but a naive designer would probably take this cockpit and put a big white shiny button on it. I'm suggesting instead that we look to getting to simple. Simple is actually a bad word. I would use the word refined, because refined means that you go through a process to strip away to get to what is really great. When it comes to your process, please, please, please remember that it should not come across like a secret sauce. There should be no big TM against your process. I hate companies that do that. I don't get what that even means. You can't trademark brilliance. Brilliance is something that should be transparent. So really break down those design walls and share, because that will lead to my next point. Lawyers, lawsuits, and I actually have a friend who's a lawyer who's watching this live stream. I'm really sorry. They are destructive towards our creativity, and I would have never been able to create this slideshow have Creative Commons never existed. So I believe in sharing so much. I believe that what I'm doing here, and I believe when I go out for beers with people and I get drunk and I talk about user experience, that is probably when I've learned the most than I ever did in school. So it's important for us to remember that, and also remember that Twitter is not sharing. Actually meeting people kind of is sharing. So you kind of have to go back a little bit old school, if you will. Results do matter. This was a banking application that we made for my client who's sitting over there for BC Credit Unions, and it did really well and got great reviews. But the only reason it did it, and I sound like I'm harping on this, but it's because we focused on what was important, which is people. We didn't think of people who live in usability labs. We didn't think of people working in artificial situations. We thought of people in real life situations, and banking is not fun. I don't know, I'm sure it's a tagline of some bank somewhere. When somebody wants to pay a bill, the last thing they want to do is enjoy that process. So my job as a designer is only to get them in and out and have them be able to know that that was done and they don't have to worry about it anymore. So having real goals and being able to follow through with them is what makes projects successful. I'm over time. So having a process that matters is really crucial. This is a very inspirational photo because it's from a company called Cultured Code, and they make an app called Things. And they made the app way before, they made it for the first version of the iPhone. And at that point, there was no software, no wireframing tools to be able to validate interactions. So they actually handmade the stencils, used those bloody expensive pens to be able to validate what they were doing so that they didn't write code or create an application until they had actually figured out what was going to work. So kudos and hats off to a company that really believes in their process that much. I've made a career out of having people speak differently. I believe that as designers, one of the worst things that we do is when we talk about our work, we use words like "I like." When you like something, that's great, but no one really cares. I was going to use a bad word. And that wouldn't have worked because it says language matters. I can't be cussing around. Instead, I would suggest that we should use words like successful, because successful means that you're grading it against some sort of criteria. Think about the objectives of the brief. don't tell me emotionally what you feel about something. Tell me why it works against what you had set out to do. So this is an incomplete presentation because I want this to be a conversation and because I really believe in sharing. So I've got a very weird, odd number of rules. I would love for us to be able to collaborate on this and take this further and to continue this conversation, because creativity is, I hope, after this presentation, a little bit broader than what it was when you walked into the room. Thank you.
That they have some very intelligent questions. They're gonna really make that a thing. We'll start us off. Down here? You ready for this?
Yeah. Ready as I'll ever be.
Hi, my name is Esther.
Hi, Esther.
So, Gagan, thank you so much for making a presentation. I do have questions regarding bringing creative people to the beginning of a project. What happens if a company, say, does not have enough money to hire people at the beginning? Like, you can't, I mean, it would make sense to have a multidisciplinary.
I get it.
People towards the beginning of a project, how to make it more successful, because there's more perspectives. But what happens if you don't have that money to hire many people towards the beginning?
Right. Well, fixing things is very expensive, for one. So if you've made a lot of decisions that required, like, practically speaking, some projects require designers to be at the table. So I've been lucky enough to work on projects where that really has not been something that I've had to sell, because people now in 2012 understand that at the core of it, and Steve Jobs, thank you, he's done a great job in elevating design, where people understand that design isn't just making things look great. We actually need to understand our user, and who better to do that than a designer. But I understand what you're saying, that if somebody, let's go with the scenario where somebody comes in and they say to you that, yeah, we've done most of your work, design work, we just need you to help us with a little bit of the typography or color, and then move on with that project. At that point, I would really look to see whether or not you want to hire that client. So for me, as a professional, I feel that it's not in my best interest, neither is it in the client's best interest, that they hire me, because I'm way too expensive to be helping them figure out whether or not the size of Arial is correct or not. So I'm happy to refer them to junior designers, but that isn't where my expertise is. That isn't the skill that I bring. I'm more useful when a project has not been unpacked and when there's problems that are problems that don't have questions attached to them. I'm better at asking the question than helping figure out how big a box should be. So it's also how you market yourself, right? So if you start the conversation by telling people what you're good at, then chances are they're not going to come to you and ask you to do fixes or ask you to come later in the game.
Who has another question?
Like your sideburns.
Oh, thank you. My name is Sean Bergman, and thank you for the presentation. It was awesome. I think the same question came up here, kind of, which is, you said more often than not, you're not going to get brought into the process. It's great when you are, but quite often you're not. So when you're not, for us in the room here, we're kind of preaching to the choir of the designers.
Yeah.
We understand we need to be brought in early, but there's kind of a corporate idea, like you get into an engineering firm somewhere that doesn't understand the value of design early on.
Yeah.
How do you bridge that gap and kind of bring that understanding of the holistic process of design and the importance of it at the beginning of a project at the CEO's office?
I have a specific example that I can give you, and I think that might help a little bit more than me preaching on concepts. I was involved in a project where wireframes had already been done, and wireframes had been done to a very high fidelity level. So for those of you who don't know what wireframes are, it's just a step before mockups, where everything has sort of been figured out in terms of interaction design for an application. The questions that I asked about those wireframes helped me prove that the wireframes had been done by somebody who didn't really understand interaction design. So what I was able to do at that point was help the company see that I could save them money in the long run if we could take the time to revise the work that they thought they had got done. And it's a difficult conversation to have. It's not an easy conversation to have. It requires being diplomatic, which I'm not very good at, but it is an important conversation to have because most business owners, so one of the things that I didn't mention in my presentation that I probably should, is try as much as you can to not work with marketing assistants. Work with C-level people. Work with people, the CEOs of the companies, the people who don't have time to see you. Those are the people who actually think like us. They actually see things in the same way, where they see that today giving Gagan 50 hours to be able to fix what we've done is actually much cheaper in the long run because he's been able to see problems with the interaction design that will actually cause our application to fail in the long run. So why would we keep building on something that is broken? So that's the way I started. The projects and conversations and communication goes in, it builds, right? Trust builds. So what people know about you before you walked into the room is really important as well. And I find that the projects where I have been referred to, I have a higher level of success to be able to have that conversation. When somebody doesn't know anything about me and they've just called me because they 1-800 numbered me, which I hope they never do, then that conversation is really difficult. And you're right, that I totally agree with you. It's a difficult conversation to have, but at some point you do have to have it.
I'd like to ask the audience, when you get the mic, if you can please bring the mic up close to your mouth and speak directly into it, then our internet audience will be able to hear you better. Thanks.
Like this. We have another question over here, Gagan.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much for your wonderful speech. This is Naki from Digital Design of VFS School. Yeah, I have a question. Could you please say something about the relationship with the craziest thing you have ever made with your creative ideas or design works?
Sorry.
The relationship between the craziest thing you have ever made with your creative ideas or design works?
The craziest thing I've ever made?
Yeah, because...
Why would I tell you that?
Because we have the name text on it.
Oh.
Sorry.
My crazy things, I'm not crazy as a designer, I hope. I think that I got that out of my system a long time ago when I made little heart-shaped cards for people. I think that's over. My crazy stuff happens when I'm not working, and I think I told Mark that in 10 days I'm going to Costa Rica for a month, and I'm going to be backpacking across Costa Rica, and I'm going to be ziplining and doing all kinds of crazy things. So it doesn't answer your question because I refuse to tell you what I've done crazy in design. That would just be, why would I do that?
Gagan, what's your craziest? I'm over to your right.
I can't see you, so just talk. It's so bright here. You guys should stand here. It's insane. It's like, I know what...
Look right, Gagan. Right is the other way.
Oh, there!
What's the craziest design project you've ever done?
Craziest design project?
Or design challenge, maybe?
I don't like this question because it takes me to places I've tried to forget. All right, I did a project where I talk about not being brought on early in a project. Make us mock-ups, we need them in 2 days. We spend 2 full waking nights doing completely useless work. We knew this project could never get funding. We knew it couldn't go anywhere, and we did it. So it's not crazy, it's depressing, and that's why I'm hoping that this question goes away and I don't have to ever think about it anymore.
Does anybody have a happier question?
Hi, that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Right or wrong, the most precious I get in any sort of creative problem solving is right at the beginning. And so if I was to take...
The block.
Pardon me?
The block? The creative block?
Possibly, yeah. But really just, that's the time I feel the least collaborative sometimes.
Right.
And to take your... the idea of your presentation and sort of turn it around, how do I, as a creative problem solver, either deal with that or find a way to be more collaborative and work outside of that silo in those early stages of a project? I don't know if you have an example of a way that you've dealt with that.
Yeah. Well, I can speak from my experience that for me, I go through similar phases in that when I first start working on a problem, I need to know like I mentioned Barbara Walters, and everybody makes fun of the friends here, they understand what I'm talking about. I ask a lot of questions, so I'm very, very social at that point. I really need to know, and I need to be engaged, and I get bored really easily as well, so people keep me aligned to what I'm supposed to be doing. But then you're right, at some point, I think all creative people need to go away and to be able to unpack and figure out what they've learned and be able to apply that, and that is sometimes a very isolating process. So when I say share, and when I say talk about community and loving your community and meeting people, I don't mean do that all the time and work with them. I think it's okay for you to have a very solitary moment within a project where you need silence and you need things to sort of appear for you. We are moving into a new office, for example, and one of the biggest debates has been to have walls or not have walls. I want walls, everybody else doesn't want walls. And so we came with this, we've come up to an agreement that for 2 months, we'll try the office without walls. And then at the end of those 2 months, we'll create walls around the office should we need those. So it's interesting, I don't always preach what I talk. I think I'm an only kid. So I enjoy people, but I'm also tired by people at some point. And I do, at some point, in my true creative moments, I need to be alone and I need to have quiet. And even Radiohead is too much noise for me. Like, I just need it to be quiet. So I agree with you, and I don't think you should change who you are. I mean, if you are creating and you're obviously paying your bills, then you're doing something right.
Is it a good one? Is it a good one? Yeah? Is there going to be swearing?
The swearing should come from me. I don't think it should be in the question.
I'm curious about being a designer, for example, when you're trying to problem solve an issue for a client. Is it all the user that's motivating you to solve that issue? Or do you see like some sort of like, you design like, I want to create the next authentic thing, the next like never been done. Hopefully it will win awards or something. You see some of that coming in?
Never. Never, never, ever, 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 never. And that is one of my weaknesses. I'm not inspired by wanting to make the next big, the next award-winning, the next whatever. It's not something that is in my DNA. It should be, because for business development, Mark will tell you, it's important to win awards and important to nominate yourself for awards and things like that, but that's not something that comes to me naturally. It's something I have to force myself. I am most loyal to projects. I'm most loyal to users who are going to end up using what I create. And I'm actually not very loyal to clients. I frequently actually have to filter what clients say to actually get the truth out of it. It's like one of those games. It's like 20 questions. You have 20 questions. The answers you get depend on the questions you ask. So, and clients are, God bless them, I love them, they pay and stuff like that, but they don't know what we need, right? Like, one of the problems we have is they don't actually understand what it is that we want. They just know what they need. So it's our gig and our responsibility, and as we evolve as designers, to figure out what it is that we need to ask. So I'm driven totally, my passion is the end user. The end goal is, how is this project going to be useful? Clients sometimes stand in the way, and I have to help them see that they're standing in the way. I sound like a really difficult designer, but I'm not. I'm a really collaborative designer, but I think it's part of my responsibility. I just wrote this long email to a designer I work with because he said, well, this client has paid us a lot of money and we need to make something sexy. He used the word sexy. Big no-no with me. Like, you don't use the word like sexy. What the fuck does that even mean? So I wrote him a long email saying, the client has paid us money, a lot of money, because they hired professionals. If they would have paid us less money, they would have hired somebody who had just graduated out of school. They've hired us because they hope that we know better. We know to ask the right questions. We know to be able to do what is right for the project. We own design. We are the owners of design. The client isn't. I'm really on a tirade today, Mark. No, I'm gonna start to burn stuff in a minute. Thank you. Thank you.